The air in the long gallery was unnaturally cold, heavy with a silence that felt older than the house itself. It was the smell that hit him first, a sharp chemical bite layered over the musty scent of velvet and old wood. Elias Thorne, a man accustomed to the darkness of the human heart, found his composure cracking. Before him, arranged in the dim gaslight, was the impossible, the collection. He was standing in a room that, according to the city of New Orleans, did not exist. A room filled with the vanished. This was the terminus of a cold case that had consumed him for months, a case that began with a concerned family in New York and ended here, in the forbidden north wing of the Villa Ray mansion. The official records would call it a tragedy, a fire, an accident. But Thorne knew the truth. He was looking at a museum of the macabre, a gallery of the dead, curated by a woman who commanded the city by day. The title of his file, scrawled in his own hand, seemed like a bitter, horrifying joke. The lady who commanded by day and conquered hearts by night. What Thorne had uncovered was not a story of passion, but of a chilling, forbidden obsession, a depravity hidden behind the city's most impenetrable facade of respectability. And as he stood in that horrifying theater, he knew that the woman responsible was, even now, charming the city's elite, her hands clean, her power absolute. Baroness Céleste de Villeray was not just a person, she was an institution. In the New Orleans of 1888, a city of intricate social codes and old-world power, she reigned supreme. Widowed young, she had inherited one of the largest shipping fortunes on the Mississippi. But where others might have retreated into quiet wealth, Céleste had expanded. She was a ruthless businesswoman in a world of men, her presence in a boardroom silencing whispers and commanding respect. By day, she was the city's benefactor. Her name was etched onto the plaques of hospitals, orphanages, and the grand new cathedral. She was a vision of pious dignity, draped in black silk, attending Mass with a devotion that shamed the city's clergy. The Villa Ray mansion on St. Charles Avenue was a fortress of good taste and old Creole tradition. Its gates were open to the most exclusive parties, its gardens meticulously curated. To be invited into her circle was to have arrived. To be cast out was a social death. But behind this performance of absolute control, the Baroness harbored a private, all-consuming interest. She was a patron of the arts, but her patronage had a disturbing, possessive quality. She did not just want to support beauty, she wanted to own it. And in her quest, she had found a way to merge her immense power with a dark, creeping obsession that had begun to fester in the hidden corners of her opulent home. The anomaly, the first crack in the facade, was the Villa Ray protégé system. The Baroness, in her public-facing generosity, would identify the city's most brilliant and invariably most beautiful young talents. A painter with a celestial hand, a soprano whose voice defied mortality, a poet whose words were too beautiful for the earth. She would sweep them up, offering them patronage beyond their wildest dreams, a private studio in her mansion, a stipend, access to her exclusive social circle. For a few weeks or sometimes months, these young talents would shine. They would be the talk of the city, paraded at the Baroness's soirees, their art praised as transcendent. And then they would vanish. The official narrative was always the same. The painter, it was said, had been sent to Paris to study. The soprano had taken a private contract in Vienna. The poet, prone to artistic melancholy, had simply moved on. But the whispers in the city's underbelly told a different story. Rival artists noted that none of these vanished protégés were ever heard from again. No letters arrived from Paris, no reviews from Vienna. They were simply erased. This disturbing pattern of acquisition and disappearance had been repeating for nearly a decade. The turnover was unsettling, but the Baroness's power was such that no one dared to ask the obvious, horrifying question: where did the protégés go? The question finally found a voice, not from within New Orleans, but from a wealthy New York family. Their son, Julien Dubois, a gifted painter with reckless charm, had been the Baroness's latest acquisition. His letters home had been ecstatic at first, filled with descriptions of the mansion's luxury and the Baroness's intense, almost suffocating attention. He wrote of her piercing gaze and her obsession with permanence. Then, the letters grew strange. He mentioned the mansion's north wing, a place that was banned to all staff and guests. He mentioned the chill in the air, even in the humid Louisiana summer. He mentioned a Dr. Aris, a man who lived in the house but was never seen. His last letter was a single, panicked scrawl. Her eyes. She wants to keep me. I am in. Odd an artist to her. I am a specimen. Then silence. The Dubois family, panicked and powerful in their own right, hired the best, Elias Thorne, a senior agent with the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. Thorne was a methodical, unshakable man, immune to social grace and political pressure. He arrived in New Orleans in October 1888 with a single objective: find Julien Dubois. Thorne's investigation began, and immediately he hit a wall of velvet and steel. New Orleans society closed ranks around the Baroness with the silent, unified force of an immune system expelling a virus. When Thorne presented his Pinkerton credentials to the police commissioner, he was met with a patronizing smile. The commissioner explained that young artists were notoriously fickle. Julien Dubois had likely run off with a lover or, tragically, succumbed to the city's many temptations. The case was a private matter, not a police one. Thorne then visited the city's society matrons, the women who supposedly knew everything. They treated his questions as a grotesque breach of etiquette. The Baroness, they assured him, was a saint. To imply otherwise was not just wrong, it was dangerous. But Thorne was trained to read what wasn't said. He saw the flicker of fear behind the commissioner's eyes. He noted the way the matron's hands trembled as they dismissed him. This was not polite society protecting its own. This was a conspiracy of silence, an organized, systemic defense of a secret that the entire city power structure seemed invested in keeping. The wall wasn't built to protect the Baroness's reputation. It was built to protect the city from the truth. Unable to penetrate the Baroness's public life, Thorne turned his attention to her household. The staff was notoriously small for such a grand estate, and they were paid extravagantly for their loyalty and their silence. Thorne spent weeks in the alleys and taverns of the French Quarter, tracking down former employees. Most refused to speak, their eyes wide with a conditioned terror. But one, a groom dismissed for drunkenness, finally talked. He spoke of the mansion's shadow, a man who lived in the North Wing and was known only as Dr. Aris Carras. Thorne dug into the name. The results were chilling. Dr. Carras had been a medical prodigy in Athens, a surgeon and anatomist obsessed with the chemistry of life. He had been publicly disgraced and exiled from Europe after forbidden experiments were discovered in his laboratory. He had been attempting to halt the decay of human tissue, not for medical science but for aesthetic preservation. He had vanished, only to re-emerge here, living as a ghost in the Villeray mansion under the complete protection of the Baroness. The patron of the arts had her own private, macabre scientist. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place, and the picture they formed was horrifying. Thorne began a 24-hour surveillance of the mansion, a grim vigil from a rented room across the avenue. From here, he could see the facade of the house, and more importantly, the band North Wing. It was, as Julian's letter had claimed, a dead space. Its windows were permanently shuttered, its balconies empty. No light ever escaped, but there was activity. Thorne noted late-night deliveries, unmarked wagons arriving in the dead of night. They didn't go to the kitchens or the main storehouses. They were wheeled by silent servants directly to a reinforced cellar door beneath the North Wing. The cargo was always the same: massive blocks of ice, crates of salt, and barrels of chemicals Thorne recognized from his darker cases: arsenic, formaldehyde, mercury. While the day side of the mansion glittered with gaslight and music, the night side was consuming the tools of a mortuary. If you find these macabre histories compelling, subscribe to our channel now. Because the secret of the North Wing, and the full, disturbing truth of what Dr. Aris was doing with those chemicals, was far worse than even Elias Thorne could have possibly prepared for. Thorne knew he needed a source inside. He focused on the only staff member who seemed to interact with both sides of the house, a pale, terrified housekeeper named Marie. She was a lifer, having come to the mansion as a girl and was now trapped by her knowledge. Thorne finally cornered her at the French market, far from the mansion's oppressive gaze. At first she refused to speak, trembling so violently she could barely stand. Thorne didn't press. He simply spoke Julian's name. The woman shattered. In a torrent of whispered, terrified fragments, she painted a picture of a house divided. The sickness, she called it. She spoke of the young Proteges, how they would arrive full of life, and then one by one they would be chosen by the Baroness. They would be moved to the North Wing for private sittings, and they would never be seen again. She spoke of the sounds, or rather the lack of them. The silence from the North Wing was absolute. The walls had been soundproofed. She mentioned the unnatural cold that seeped from under the doors, and finally she gave Thorne the word that sealed his dread. When he asked where the bodies were, she shook her head. Not bodies, she wept. She keeps them. She calls it the gallery. The gallery. The word hung in the air, a grotesque promise. Thorne now had confirmation, but he had no proof. The police were a dead end. The city was a fortress. He could never get a warrant to search the Villeray mansion. He would have to go in himself. But the estate was impenetrable. He needed a distraction, a night when the entire household and the Baroness herself would be completely and publicly occupied. And in New Orleans there was only one such night, All Saints' Day and the Baroness's legendary masquerade. It was the single most important social event of the year. Hundreds of the city's elite would crowd the mansion's main ballroom and gardens, masked and distracted, celebrating until dawn. It was the perfect cover. The Baroness, playing the consummate host, would be the center of all attention. The staff would be consumed by the party. And the North Wing, the band, silent heart of the house, would be, for a few precious hours, vulnerable. Thorne secured a simple black mask and a servant's entry pass. He would enter the party not as a guest, but as an executioner of the truth. His target, the North Wing. His mission, to find the gallery. On the night of November 1st, the Villeray mansion was a blaze of light. Music spilled out onto the avenue, a vibrant pulse that masked the city's dark heart. Elias Thorne slipped past the security, his simple mask and borrowed uniform granting him access to the pandemonium of the service corridors. He moved against the current of frantic servants, pushing deeper into the house. He found the door connecting the main house to the North Wing. It was, as Marie had said, locked, reinforced, and soundproofed. He picked the lock, the click lost in the distant sound of the orchestra. The moment the door opened, the air changed. The warmth and perfume of the party vanished, replaced by a frigid, sterile cold. The music was gone, cut off by the insulated walls. This side of the house was utterly silent, lit by only a few low-burning, colorless gas jets. The smell was overpowering now, a chemical fog that burned his eyes. He was no longer in a home. He was in a tomb. He followed the central corridor, the temperature dropping with every step, until he reached a set of heavy, industrial doors. They were unlocked. Beyond the doors lay the laboratory. It was a horrifying fusion of 19th-century science and medieval obsession. Stainless steel tables gleamed under bright clinical gas lamps. Shelves were lined with hundreds of glass jars, containing chemicals, compounds, and parts. Surgical tools of every conceivable shape were laid out with chilling precision. In the corner, Thorne saw a complex array of tubes and pumps, connected to a porcelain-lined table with gutters for fluid. This was Dr. Aris's workshop, but it was the room beyond that truly stopped Thorne's heart. He pushed open a heavy, insulated door and was blasted with a wave of Arctic air. It was an ice room, a custom-built industrial cold storage chamber decades ahead of its time, and inside, hanging from hooks, were pale, shrouded forms. But Thorne's attention was drawn to a large, leather-bound book left open on a lectern. It wasn't a medical log, it was a journal. And the handwriting was not the doctor's. It was the elegant, controlled script of Baroness Céleste de Villeray. Thorne read the pages, and the full, macabre nature of the Baroness's obsession was laid bare. It was a philosophy of madness. She was not a killer, she wrote. She was a curator, a savior. She saw herself as a tragic figure cursed with the ability to see true, perfect beauty and forced to watch it decay and die. Time is the great vandal, she wrote, And death is its most brutish accomplice. I will not allow it, she wrote of Julien Dubois. His hands, the way he held the brush. It was a moment of pure, divine grace. To let that grace fade, to let him grow old and wrinkled, would be the real sin. I have conquered time for him. I have made him eternal. The journal detailed the process with horrifying clarity. Dr. Arras would administer a precise, painless poison. Then, as the body was still warm, the preservation would begin. A complete replacement of blood with her own chemical compound. A process that took days, perfecting the skin, the eyes, the color. She wasn't just preserving them, she was perfecting them. She was an artist, and her medium was the human body. At the back of the laboratory, hidden behind a velvet curtain, was a final door. Thorne opened it and stepped into the abyss. He was in the gallery. It was a vast, two-story hall, dark and cold, designed like a private museum. But there were no paintings on the walls. There were dioramas. Positioned on pedestals under focused spotlights were the vanished, all of them. There was Julien Dubois frozen at his easel, a look of profound concentration on his face, his hand holding the brush. There was the soprano, posed as if mid-aria, her hands clasped, her eyes wide and glassy. The poet, slumped over a desk, a quill in his hand, a pensive look on his features. Dozens of them dating back a decade. Men and women. Each one perfectly preserved, dressed in their finest, their skin like flawless porcelain. They were her conquests. She had not conquered their hearts with love. She had conquered them with arsenic and formaldehyde. She had kept them, just as Julien's letter had feared. It was a horrifying, silent audience of the dead. He is beautiful, isn't he, Julien? I captured his essence. The voice was calm, cultured, and directly behind him. Elias Thorne spun around. Baroness Céleste de Villeray stood in the doorway, her masquerade mask in her hand. She was not panicked. She was not angry. She was proud. She looked upon her collection with the serene satisfaction of an artist. Beside her stood the pale, gaunt figure of Dr. Arras Carras, his hands clasped, a syringe held loosely in one hand. "I knew you would find your way here, Mr. Thorne," the Baroness said, stepping into the light. "You have the same intensity, the same passion for permanence. You are a collector of truths, I am a collector of beauty." She took a step closer. "You are the only one who has ever understood, the only one who has seen my work." Dr. Arras raised the syringe, the needle glinting. "And now," the Baroness whispered, a look of profound aesthetic appreciation in her eyes, "I believe it is time to preserve that understanding. You would make a fine addition to the collection." Before Dr. Arras could lunge, a new sound echoed in the cold hall, heavy footsteps. The doors to the gallery burst open, but it was not the police coming to save Thorne. It was the police commissioner himself, flanked by three of the city's most powerful men, a judge, a banker, and a state senator. They were all still in their masquerade finery. They took in the horrifying scene, the dozens of bodies, the defiant baroness, the terrified doctor, the armed Pinkerton, and their faces did not register shock. It registered annoyance. "Céleste," the senator said, his voice cold, "you have become careless." They had not been ignorant of her activities, they had been complicit, they were the protection network. The Baroness's power and wealth fueled the city, and they would not let a scandal bring it all down. They had been following Thorne, waiting for him to find the proof they needed, not to expose her but to control her. "This is not a police matter, Mr. Thorne," the commissioner said, taking the agent's gun. "This is a private, family tragedy." The cover-up was immediate and ruthlessly efficient. Elias Thorne was detained, held incommunicado in a private cell, not as a witness but as a threat. The Baroness Céleste de Villeray was declared unwell, suffering a severe nervous breakdown from the stress of her public duties. By dawn, she was on one of her own ships, bound for a private asylum in rural France, never to be seen or heard from again. Dr. Arras Carras simply vanished. No record of his departure, no trace of his existence. He was likely at the bottom of the Mississippi, his own expertise in preservation useless against a weighted chain. That same night, as the last of the party guests stumbled home, a tragic fire broke out in the Villeray mansion. It was contained, miraculously, to the abandoned north wing. The wing, and its entire macabre contents, burned to the ground. The official report cited a faulty gas line. The vanished Protéges, including Julien Dubois, were now officially listed as victims of this terrible, accidental fire. The cold case was closed. After a week, Elias Thorne was released. The police commissioner personally escorted him to the train station, with a one-way ticket back to New York. His career with the Pinkertons was over, his reputation stained by a botched investigation. He was warned in no uncertain terms that if he ever spoke of what he had seen, or even set foot in Louisiana again, he would not be so lucky. The Villeray empire was quietly absorbed by the Baroness's concerned associates, the senator, the judge, and the banker. The city of New Orleans forgot. The story was rewritten. The Baroness was a tragic figure, the Protéges were victims of a sad accident. But the truth of the disturbing Gallery of Hearts was buried. The Villeray mansion was eventually repaired, the north wing rebuilt, and it stands to this day, a beautiful monument to a forbidden secret. The story of Céleste de Villeray serves as a chilling testament to the fact that with enough power and enough money, there is no sin that cannot be hidden, no crime that cannot be erased, and no depravity that cannot be masked by a respectable facade.